In today's video, we're looking at one of the more interesting prospects in this year's class. We're breaking down Elic Ayomanor, wide receiver out of Stanford. What are his strengths and weaknesses? Where do we think he's utilized at the next level? What's his draft stock looking like? And most importantly, what's he going to be doing for us in fantasy? Watch to the end of this video, and you should have a pretty good idea. In terms of Elic's height and weight go, he's give or take 6'2", 210 pounds. That's pretty good size for the position, a little bit above average, so that is good. In terms of his date of birth, PFF doesn't have one listed, but I looked it up. He's 21 years old at the moment, and he'll be 21 for the majority of his rookie season. Now, in terms of his production, you do see that correctly. He's only got 2 years of college experience, which means he is a sophomore coming out. Now, if you look at his production, though, it's really solid production for a receiver coming out of Stanford. His true freshman year was 1,022 yards and 6 touchdowns. That's really good production for a freshman. You don't see that very often. Then he took a step back this year. It was 831 yards and 6 touchdowns. Now, I will say his targets went up just slightly. If you watch Stanford this year, it's a lot of runs, especially quarterback runs. So they're not really a air raid offense per se. Just like I said, watch the film on Elic. You'll see a lot of QB runs. So that does impact his production just a tad. Looking at some advanced stats, we looked at every draft-eligible FBS wide receiver with at least 50 targets, which was about 143 for the sample size. Ayomanor ran 470 routes, which was good for 93% of his team's routes, which is good. That means he's on the field consistently. We're not worried about playing time with him at Stanford. Now, as far as his snap percentages go, you see that he was out wide 86.6% of the time, and in the slot 13.2% of the time. Now, I don't know if that's just how Stanford did it for him, but I am kind of worried about those numbers. It means that he's very linear in his role in an offense. It means he's just going to be an X or a Z receiver, which we'd like to see him in the slot a little bit more, just because in terms of our data, strictly out wide receivers are not particularly great for us in fantasy. So we do scratch our heads a little bit at that. And as far as his yards per route run go, 1.9 was good for 77th in the class. I'm not sure if this is counting in the scrambles and the QB runs and things like that. If so, that's really hurting his grade a lot here. Now, in terms of his PFF receiving grade, 74.3 was tied for 52nd in the sample size. So you can already tell a trend here. PFF doesn't really like this guy very much. As far as his yak per reception goes, 3.9 was tied for 112th in the sample size. Now, he is a typical go up and get it jump ball wide receiver that you want to target deep down the field. So, he's not going to have the best yak. He's pretty much just going to be catching it and falling down for the most part. Now, his missed tackles forced, 10 was tied for 51st in the sample size. He's not overly physical at the after the catch. He's not stiff-arming people off of him, and he's not super elusive after the catch either. So that's, kind of a knock on him. In terms of his contested catch percentage, 48.3%. It's not that great considering what other receivers are doing with the same type of volume. Like we said, we want in that 50 to 55% range, so he's just a tad under that. Now, he did have, ample opportunity. He had 27 contested catch attempts. He only brought in 13 of them. Now, that does question, ball placement and things like that, but we did see some drops from time to time in these contested catch situations. It wasn't very consistent, so I think this grade's pretty accurate. In terms of his targets and receptions per game, he had 9.08 targets and 5.25 receptions per game. So that's not great also. That means almost half of his targets were incompletions. That's not what we want to see. Now, in terms of his yards, 831 yards was good for 69.25 a game. That's, kind of average in terms of college production. So, do with that what you will. In terms of touchdowns, he only had 6 this year, which was good for 0.5 a game. So if you look at these stats, he's kind of average at a lot of these things and below average in some others. Looking at some more advanced stats for Ayomanor, specifically him versus man in zone coverages, we see that his PFF grade versus man was 76.7, which was good for 20th in the sample size, and his yards per route run versus man was 2.01, which was tied for 33rd in the sample size. That kind of translates into film for me. He's a pretty physical receiver where he kind of, brushes off these corners that are more handsy, and he's able to make these contested catches when he's able to actually bring the ball in. So that does translate onto film, and makes sense to me. Now his PFF grade versus zone slightly worse, 67.3, which was 42nd in the sample size, and his yards per route run versus zone was 1.8, which was 41st in the sample size. I do think he's slightly worse in zone coverage just because he's just not as great at finding the soft spots in the zone. He's more so your typical jump ball man-on-man receiver, so that does translate a little bit as well. Now his PFF grade on screens was 40.7, which was 214th in the sample size. I had to bring it down to any receiver that basically had a screen target. He only had 3 screen targets this year, so I don't think we take this grade into account at all because it's not a big enough sample size in my opinion. Now his PFF grade in the slot was 72.5, which was 67th in the sample size. That's not great considering we want our receivers to be as versatile as possible. He's below average in the slot, which means at the next level he's probably going to be a X or Z, which kind of limits his versatility, and we like our receivers as far as fantasy to be as versatile as possible so they can be on the field as much as possible. Now, as far as his first downs caught, 43 was tied for 24th in the sample size, which means, he's relatively consistent at being clutch and getting those first down opportunities. We want to give a special shout out to all of our Patreon supporters. So thank you to Big Hunt, SP, Mazjack, and Infamy MTG for supporting the channel. We really do appreciate it. Now, if you want to become a Patreon member yourself, you'll gain access to a lot of really cool things, including a private Discord server where we talk about real-life football and fantasy football, private live streams. We'll probably be doing one on the NFL draft, so that'll be really cool. We do custom videos as well per request. We've already done one on Isaac Garendo, and we're looking forward to doing a lot more of those. And also, you'll gain early access to all videos as well, usually a few days in advance. My favorite part of the video. So, quick recap. Elic Ayomanor is a wide receiver out of Stanford. He's give or take 6'2", 210 pounds. That's really good size for the position. And he is a sophomore, which is kind of unusual for a sophomore to come out. And he's 21 years old, which means he's really young. That's good for our dynasty perspectives. In terms of his valuation, we think he's worthy of a late second round pick. I've seen him go anywhere from the mid-second to the late third in some of these mocks. So it's kind of uncertain where he's going to land in the NFL draft. In terms of his high comp, we compared him to Chris Godwin. Now, I think Chris Godwin's a little bit better in the slot, but in terms of Chris Godwin's ability to be kind of good at everything, but not great at any one thing, I think Elic Ayomanor shares that type of trait with him. In terms of his low comp, we gave him Mac Hollins. Now, I unfortunately see a situation where Elic Ayomanor is tasked to be the vertical X for a team where, kind of like that DK Metcalf role. I think he would struggle in that role. Not to say that he would be bad, but I think he would turn out like a Mac Hollins whose career has kind of just been him bouncing around from team to team, and he's having a big game here and there, but very inconsistent. I think that's what Elic Ayomanor would be if a team decided to not use him as a more dynamic, do-it-all type of receiver. In terms of his official grade, we gave him a 74 out of 100. That's kind of a lower-end good prospect. You'll see he's kind of in that wide receiver 10 range for us, wide receiver 10 to 11 range. Moving on to some of his routes, his short route grade was 4 out of 5. We thought that he was pretty solid on the shallow crosses, The slants especially, not so good on screens, but solid on hitches. So we knocked his grade a little bit because of that. So in terms of his medium routes, we gave him a 3.5 out of 5. Now, the problem with this, he still has the same kind of route running in terms of his deep and short route running as he does on the medium routes. Problem is, when he gets into these catch and traffic situations, he has these concentration drops that come up a lot more than you'd like to see. So when he's doing like digs across the middle of the field or short crossers, things like that, he's consistently dropping some of these balls when it's really tight windowed throws. So we give him a 3.5 out of 5 for that. His deep routes, we gave him a 4.5 out of 5. The reasoning for this is he sometimes can utilize his releases to get instant separation and can beat people deep downfield on these goes and post routes. And he can utilize his speed really well as well. In terms of his double moves, we gave him a 4 out of 5. He has ran some pretty nasty double moves at Stanford. They didn't ask him to use it a lot, but we saw an out and up. We saw a zig route as well. And he's able to kind of cross face on the post routes. I know that's not really a double move, but I kind of consider that for the grade a little bit. And he's got these little nuanced head fakes and stuff as well that he utilizes. So we thought those were pretty good. He didn't utilize them a lot because Stanford doesn't really throw the ball a lot. But when we did see him, they were effective. In terms of his releases, he doesn't really have the deepest bag of releases. We mainly saw stutter releases, outside releases, which are especially good. He showcased a diamond release from time to time, and he did a kind of a cool release where he would dart inside and then jump outside for his classic outside release. So we gave him a 4.5 out of 5. It's not going to translate as good at the NFL level, but it's still borderline some of the best releases in the class, in my opinion. In terms of his speed and acceleration, we gave him an 8 out of 10 for both of those metrics. We think he's going to run in probably the 4.4s, but he utilizes all of that. That translates on the field 100%. He's a pretty fast guy. He's not Isaiah Bond, but he is pretty fast. And you'll see that on these go balls, post routes, things like that. You'll see him consistently getting separation there. Now, I will say, take it with a grain of salt a little bit because he was playing at Stanford. They don't play the highest level of competition. He's not playing in the SEC consistently. So there is that. In terms of his deceleration, we gave him a 3.5 out of 5. Like we said, he's kind of okay on these hitch routes, and he's definitely not great on the screens. And he's not really great at cutting in and out of his routes from time to time, so he's a little above average there. And you'll see that it's kind of a trend going forward. He's just not great at any one thing outside of maybe his releases and some of his route running. In terms of his agility, we didn't see a lot of agility. We saw some jukes here and there after the catch, but we gave him a 3 out of 5 because it was just slightly above average. Nothing really to write home about, though. Change of direction, we gave him a 3.5 out of 5. Now, in terms of his, double moves and things like that, it translates. After the catch, he's able to find whatever angle is the most probable for a touchdown, and he's able to score that way, use his speed in terms of his change of direction ability. So we thought it was above average. Now, in terms of his catching, if you watch Elic Ayomanor's highlights, you're going to think this guy has some of the best hands in the entire class. I will say they are good at times, and then there are other times where they're not as good. It's mainly concentration drops, but like you saw in his contested catch percentage, it can be very inconsistent at times. That's why we gave him a 3.5 out of 5. If he's able to clean those up, man, he's got really great hands, and he showcases those from time to time, especially if you saw that one-handed kind of Odell Beckham-y type of catch in the end zone. He's got the upside. In terms of his catch in traffic, we give him a 2.5 out of 5. Like we said earlier, he's got these concentration drops where he's kind of worried about getting hit, and that kind of takes his mind off of his catching ability, and he'll drop him. That happened more than we like to admit, unfortunately. In terms of his run after catch ability, we gave it a 3.5 out of 5. He's not going to be getting the run after catch ability on the short routes per se. He's able basically to maximize yardage if somebody tackles him, he's kind of extending himself to get the majority of the yards that way, the yards after catch, I mean. But he's not super wiggly, so there is that. But now if he does get in open space, he is dangerous, and he has that Terry McLaurin ability where he can just burn everybody and get to the end zone that way. Now, in terms of his dog factor, we knocked him a little bit because of the worry of getting hit, and he doesn't embrace physical contact as much. So we knocked him a little bit there. We gave him a 3.5 out of 5. Now, in terms of his analytics, though, we gave him an 8 out of 10. He's a second-year player, and he almost has 2,000 total yards. That's more yards than a lot of these prospects have in 4 years. He's also got 12 touchdowns as well. Although I would have liked to see him transfer and go to another school that's more air raid centric for his junior season so he could basically boost his draft stock, because I think this kid has a lot of upside. I do like his production over the 2 years. Now, his projected draft capital, he's projected on NFL Draft Buzz as a late second, early third round pick, so we gave him a 3 out of 5 there. Now, in terms of his XD slot ability, we gave him a 3.5 out of 5. Now, he's good in the X and the Z position. He's not so good in the slot, but I do think he'll sneak into that role every now and then if a team lets him. So we do like the versatility. It is above average. Now, onto my worries and limitations on him. He's more of a jack of all trades, master of none. Now, he can improve that to be really good at any one thing. He is only a sophomore, so he does have limited experience. But if he doesn't, he kind of has the risk of kind of falling behind on the depth chart on some of these teams, because teams usually prefer receivers to have specific skill sets. And in Elic's case, he's not really a specific skill set kind of guy. He's just kind of a do-it-all type of player. And then his catch and traffic ability, he is going to have to clean that up. There's nothing more frustrating to a coach than concentration drops. So looking at all these, you can definitely see he's above average in some things and kind of average in others. So he's going to have to get better at a few things for sure. So where does Elic Ayomanor stack up with the rest of the 2025 class? Well, he's around that wide receiver 12 range. Now, I could see if he gets better at any one thing, he could jump up this draft board. And like I said, if a team can utilize him better, he's definitely in that Jack Bech, Isaiah Bond type of range. But since he has some inconsistencies, he's down there in the Trey Harris, Pat Bryant type of range, which is, on the lower end of the good category for us. Obviously, he's better than Ja'Cory Brooks because everyone is. But all honesty, he's a pretty solid player. I think he'll carve out a role as a wide receiver 2, maybe wide receiver 3 on a team. So, he does have some upside. If you're enjoying the content, please like, comment, and even subscribe. It helps us out with the algorithm a lot. And, we really do enjoy making this content for you guys. And last but not least, thank you guys for watching.